Thanks for joining me. My name is Alex Cowan. I've been an entrepreneur and an intrapreneur. I'm the author of this book, Starting a Tech Business, and I maintain this curriculum here at alexandercowan.com. Today we're going to talk about taking all the things that you've learned about your customer and packaging those into actionable, discussable, and ultimately testable inputs to product development. You've probably heard how terrible waterfall is and how terrific Agile is, and I'm not going to go into all that, but I will say this: Agile is an extremely powerful and, for most purposes today, largely superior way of going about product development. And another thing that I think is really notable about Agile, especially for the newcomer, is that while it's become kind of a big book discipline, the original Agile manifesto was only 68 words and very focal. And it basically said we value individual interactions over processes and tools. We value working software over comprehensive documentation, by which they mean specifications, not, if you feel you need to provide documentation to your end user so they can understand how to use the product, I think Agile would say that's fine. They value customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and they value responding to change over following an arbitrary plan. And that's really the meat of the Agile Manifesto right there. And when we apply Agile in this body of work around venture design that's here on the site, where we use design thinking, we use lean startup, we use customer discovery, what we're doing is taking our personas, problem scenarios, alternatives, and value propositions, which are sort of the nexus of our work on design thinking. We step up to the plate and we create user stories, which are an Agile artifact that is the format for inputs into development. And these are supposed to be things that initiate discussion rather than serve as these sort of static specifications that you toss over the fence. So development occurs intermixed with this discussion. We then go out and validate that what we created matters, and that's one of the big innovations around lean startup, the pairing of lean startup and Agile, that you don't always know. Even if you're pairing a product owner with a developer, you don't always know what's going to work, because if you're developing a new product and you're innovating, you need to make allowances for the fact that you're only going to know if the product's going to be successful once it has contact with the market. And so the way that Agile and Lean Startup kind of pair, that's a little bit different than some of the traditional views of how Agile works, is that for your past iteration, the past set of output that you've created in your development process, you're out validating that or invalidating it with customers, seeing if they care about what you did, if what you did delivers on the value proposition that you thought it would. In the present iteration, you're collaborating with the development team, discussing the user stories you've created, and in the future iteration, you're taking your validated learning and you're preparing a set of ideas that you'll encapsulate in Agile user stories and perhaps wireframes. Agile user stories are a great tool to help you encapsulate your perspective in a way that's actionable and discussable with your implementation team. And another nice aspect of stories is that they're nestable. So you can see in the diagram here this idea of epic stories that talk about a very general event, and then stories that decompose individual actions within that epic story, and then test cases that allow you to supplement those with additional detail. The stories themselves have this very specific syntax. As a persona, and this is one way this ties back to our work on design thinking, I want to do something so that I can derive some kind of benefit. And this last clause, which I often see left out, is one of the most important, because this is its own sort of mini assumption, a la lean startup, about explaining and stating why we think the user wants to do this thing. And it will also serve to help us validate or invalidate, once we release this product, whether we were delivering on what we wanted to do for the user. here's an example of an epic story for Enable Quiz. This is an example company I've been using in the workshops here. They're going to develop a lightweight technical screening quiz. So for companies that hire engineers, this is a tool that will allow them to easily screen candidates for various skill sets. So one of the key personas is Helen, the HR manager, and this is a story about her wanting to create a quiz so she can help screen candidates. Now, typically what you then do is create a set of child stories, and this is a fine way to do things. Another possibility, and something that I do in my work, in my classes, is we create a storyboard of the epic, especially if it's a really important epic. So here's Helen, for example, wondering about how she's going to figure out which questions she's going to use for Frank's open position. Frank is the hiring manager. Here's Frank getting the question from Helen about what are the right questions to ask, what are the right skill areas to probe. I think this raises some interesting questions for discussion with an implementer about how can we make that interaction simpler. Are we going to make them type this up in emails to each other, or can we somehow, is there a win to do this through the app? And Helen then may need to purchase more quiz banks. This is a kind of licensable thing with Enable Quiz, so we got to make sure we make that simple and easy and non-nuisance creating. And maybe Frank wants to add some of his own custom questions, and that occurs. Helen administers a quiz, and then she wants to send the results to Frank, and maybe this makes us wonder, oh, well, maybe she wants to send some notes along with the quiz scores when she sends the quizzes over to Frank. So this is an example of how storyboarding an epic can sometimes help you draw out and think about some other possibilities and better put yourself in the shoes of the customer. Now we're going to do a 4-minute exercise, draft an epic story. An epic story, this is a pretty broad epic that you're seeing here with Enable Quiz. An epic story, a product will be composed of many, many epic stories. So this isn't a story that encapsulates your whole product idea. It's just one part of the user's interaction with the product. And it could be onboarding, it could be something in the middle of the game where they're doing something. Anything that you want to work on is fine. I would just pick something valuable and important. So I'm going to pause, take 4 minutes, and now we move on. Now we're going to create a storyboard for that epic. We'll take 10 minutes. On the workshop page, you'll find a set of pre-printed storyboarding squares that you can use, or you can draw these freehand. And so as an example with Enable Quiz, we've seen Helen go through this process of creating the quiz already. So take 10 minutes and storyboard your epic out sequentially. There are 6 panels here, and the storyboards tend to work well in rhythms of 3, but it is certainly by no means the only proportion used for storyboards. So I'll pause and we'll move on. So now what we'll do is take our epic and the storyboard, and we're gonna write stories for those. And what you'll want to do is label those onto your storyboard after you're done, or perhaps as you go along, whatever works best for you. And what I think you'll find is that this makes for a nice deliverable when you're going and initiating discussion with your developers. So let's take 10 minutes, and you'll flesh out the various child user stories that break down your epic into more soluble pieces. So I'm going to pause. This is a 10-minute exercise, and now I'll move on. So now we're going to do peer presentations, another exercise. So take 5 minutes. If you're in teams, I recommend actually cross-pollinating teams and presenting to someone in a different team. These are the things you should cover as a presenter. If you haven't created a positioning statement, you can find that in actually any of the other venture design workshops, or just generally explain what you're doing. And these are the questions you should answer. As the audience, make sure you're focused on, do you understand the story, and not providing editorial at this point about, I think it's a good idea, I think it's a bad idea. Okay, I'm going to pause. and we'll move on. Now we're going to talk about prototyping. Prototyping is a way for anyone to rough out their idea in a more tangible form. And the key thing with prototyping, particularly if you're new to it, is to stay focused on the persona, your customer, and the problem area, but don't get too married to any particular approach. It's unwise at this point, and you can see here that these Buddhist monks make these sand paintings and then just sweep them away, these mandalas. Buddhism, I think it has to do with the impermanence of life and being, but the same thing goes on with prototyping. You have to be not willy-nilly, but ready to sort of scrap things and try again. The whole point of prototyping is to take advantage of the flexibility and relatively low cost of innovating and changing things that you have as a startup, because your flexibility and your expense all decrease as you mature a product and put it out to a lot of users. So this is really, if you're creating a new product, if you're a startup, if you're an existing company creating a new product, you're going to play to your strengths here and be very iterative and be ready to throw things away and try a lot of different things at this stage, because now it's cheap and easy. Later, it'll be really hard. I get the question a lot, how do I make a really good prototype? And there's a lot of different ways, and we're going to talk about those, but the number one problem with prototyping, at least that I observe, and certainly I've observed it with myself, is that I haven't really explored the problem scenario with the customer fully enough yet. With the venture design process, we first ask, who are we creating this product for, and what problem scenarios and alternatives are we going to deliver a value proposition against, and what assumptions do we have to make so that this product, when it comes out, is better than the current alternatives and people are actually buying it and using it. Then we go out and do as much discovery and experimentation as we can without actually building product. And then at this point, we have well understood, validated focal propositions to go and develop. Or we've invalidated our idea and we're not going to waste time and money developing idea A. We're going to try out proposition B and see if we want to take that to the implementation phase. So not to be glib, but this is the number one problem I see with prototyping is the problem scenarios and the persona, the user, are not they could be better researched for a lot less money than it's going to cost to build product to figure that stuff out. So step number one with prototyping, in my view, is go and identify comps. And these aren't necessarily similar products, they just have similar functional attributes. The interface elements that you're going to use, they're very, very rarely is a novel approach to user interface the breakthrough thing for a startup. And in general, the thing with a startup is you have, or which is any new product, is you have enough novelty already. So the more, in non-critical areas you can tread well understood ground, the better off you're going to be. And the best way to do that with prototyping and user interface is to reuse existing metaphors and elements. So go out and find comps, things that work in a way that are similar to what you want to do. I built a product last winter with some collaborators called Brand Lattice, and this is a brand identity platform for designers and their clients. And we realized that this is a sequential process, so it's kind of a wizard. You go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, and you can jump back to step 1 if you want to. So we went and we looked around at various unrelated products that implemented this type of wizard approach to help manage users through the sequential process of specifying something they want. We looked at a travel site, we looked at an insurance site, and this gave us a few ideas about general approaches and what we liked and what we didn't like about different approaches to this sort of sequential navigation. So now we're going to do a 5-minute exercise. Think about, for your application, what are the key functional elements that you need, and then what are comparable applications that do those types of things, and which ones are best practice, and what do you like and not like about them. So take 5 minutes, go out, find these things, take screenshots, make notes, and I'm going to pause now, and then we'll move on. we're going to do a quick presentation among the various students. So I would do 2 minutes, a quick presentation from up to 3 people. We have 6 minutes allotted for this, about what functional blocks did they identify, what comparables did they find, and what did they like and not like about those. And I'll pause. And moving on, the next step is wireframing, and it's like user stories. Wireframes are for having discussions, so they're not a work of art. They're not the foundation of an application usually. And there are a lot of good tools out there. I think things that good tools deliver are they help you color inside the lines. So they help you have relative freedom about what you're going to do, but at the same time use existing metaphors and so forth. So scroll bars and buttons and things that exist in web pages, mobile apps, and so forth. And are hence going to be easy to implement in well understood environments like Bootstrap or mobile development environment. And so this is an example of some wireframes that we made at brand LATTICE using this wizard approach. I did this using a tool called BALSAMIQ, which is a popular wireframing tool. And then we overlaid some additional detail. The thing you see on there now was made by the lead designer, and that was actually made in Adobe Illustrator. It's kind of different. And then what we did was we created, in our particular case, this is not to say this is always the right way, but given who was able to do what at the given point, we created a series of Photoshop outputs, so sort of looked like the real app, but it wasn't. And we put those in Keynote and created sort of with Keynote or PowerPoint, you can create a prototype where if you click or tap on a tablet, the screens will advance to various places. You actually build sort of a working prototype. So we did our early concept testing this way, and that worked well to help us validate the initial design. A few notes on prototyping in general. You want to let your key assumptions about what's important to the user drive the type of experiments you do. So you want to know what you're trying to validate, not just, hey, do you like this product? And there's a lot of different approaches doing this. Keynote and PowerPoint are actually pretty good. You can make some kind of clickable prototypes. There are prototyping tools that allow you to make interactive prototypes. I personally don't use those because I think they end up being kind of complicated, and you end up doing that thing where you're sort of building something kind of complicated. You get married to it. It takes up a lot of time. I like to do stuff that's a little rougher. And then some people, if they're really, really fluent and comfortable with HTML and JavaScript, will just use that and they'll do their prototyping that way. So the important thing is to document key assumptions as you go along. So rather than arguing about the user will understand this, the user won't, make a decision, make an assumption, and then make a plan to test that as quickly and early as possible with as rough a prototype as you can muster. So it's a lot about process. And this at brand LATTICE, we had this question about drag and drop that we were going to use. I think it's still not really a mainstream thing that people encounter on the web. So we said, this would work really well, it'd be really nice functionally, but this isn't an app that necessarily all the users are going to use a whole lot. Will they get it? So we noted this is an assumption. None of us were entirely sure. And it turned out that on our initial version, 70% of the users were just baffled. They had no idea that drag and drop was available, that's the way they should accomplish the task that we asked them, that we artificially motivated them to do. So we had sort of a series of heavier and heavier solutions to this, but the heaviest being just can it and rethink the UI. But it turned out the relatively subtle change that you see there with the little arrow actually was enough where and the change in the copy was enough where then we got 100% on that second version that you see. So documenting your assumptions and testing those things early and being really focused about those is a great way to avoid waste, basically, and anxiety, because you acknowledge what you don't yet know and you make a plan to know it. One pet concept of mine is this idea of the MTP, minimum testable product. And we talked about the minimum viable product in Venture Design 2 and Lean Startup. The idea with the minimum testable product is this is the simplest thing you can create to go and validate or invalidate some of your tactical user interface assumptions. So for instance, that Keynote prototype that I mentioned we created, that was an MTP. And so the idea is that instead of waiting until you have full working product out there, you're able to decouple your pivotal assumptions about, is this product fundamentally relevant to the customer, and is it a tactical usability issue that's getting in the way of that? So MTP allows you to go pair that away, that those tactical usability issues, and validate those separately, which is nice. Anytime in a innovation in a startup environment where you can unbundle risk and dispose of it sooner, that's generally a good thing for you. So if you'd like, you can take a minute, and this app that I use a lot, BALSAMIQ, is available in Google Apps. If you don't want to install it, by all means don't. I would read all the notices and so forth, but I think it's a pretty good tool, and it is neat that it's on Google Apps. Though that it is paid. There's a free trial, but you ultimately have to pay for it. So you may want to take a minute and do that. I'll pause. Now we're going to take 15 minutes and create mockups. By all means, you can create these with pencil and paper by hand. That's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But using the wireframes that using the epic story you created and drawing on the comps that you looked at, now you're going to create a set of wireframes for your product. Do the best you can. If you create something, you've won. You've been successful. Even if you never end up really using it, you'll be moving towards a more tangible idea of what you want, and B, the skill set of being able to sketch out your ideas. I'll pause. And now I would do pure presentation. So you had recapped the epic, and now you're going to show how would the user navigate the sketches you use to accomplish the goal that they had in the epic. And what do you think will be the most challenging parts of implementing that UI? So take 5 minutes on each side to run through that. We're going to close with a few ideas on branding and looking good. This is something that doesn't have to take a lot of time and will save you a lot of time in the long run if you do a little bit now. So you see the diagram here. The branding generally has these 4 phases that you move through. In the strategy phase, you have a great input with the positioning statement that you've already created in the venture design series, the customer storytelling that you've done. Brand Lattice is actually a great tool to take those things and create a visual definition of kind of what your brand personality and your brand strategy looks like. We're not going to do that here, but that's something you can quickly do offline. And then creation of the brand strategy in this case is mostly about creating a simple style guide. And there's a post here that you can go use as a Google Doc you can use as a starting point. And this is kind of a dull bit of housekeeping, but picking a few colors, picking a few typefaces, and just going with those will save you a lot of wasted time cleaning stuff up, arguing about it, should it be blue, should it be red. Consistency is the most important thing, and the style guide will give you that. And once you've got all that done, expression and stewardship are just a matter of making sure that style guide is still working for you. And having that already done will again save you a lot of time at critical moments. We'll close with this summary of the customer development framework, which is an interesting way to look at where you are in the process, and maybe ask yourself at this point if and when you want to go actually do product implementation. The first phase is customer discovery. You're learning about your personas and your problem scenarios. Your key assumptions are still nascent. Then you create a minimum viable product to test those propositions, and that may or may not actually be working software. We talked a lot about that in Venture Design 2. And at this point, you're out, you're testing, you're running experiments, the quickest, cheapest experiments you can think of to validate or invalidate those key assumptions. Once you achieve product market fit, which means you've got a reliable, identifiable market of non-trivial size that you can sell to, then you're looking at scaling up your customer creation, your sales recipes. And beyond that, you're building a company. So to take this venture design process full circle, we ask who, and we create personas, and we make sure we know who we're creating this product for. We find problem scenarios that are valuable to them, and we make sure we understand the alternatives that they're using today against which we're going to deliver value propositions, and we make a series of assumptions about if and how our value proposition is going to be better enough than the alternatives where the customer wants to buy this product from us. Then we do discovery and experimentation to validate or invalidate those propositions. And we talked today about user stories and prototypes as a way to encapsulate all this in an implementation friendly format. And then we're driving towards this moment with our product and or promotion where we say, hey, time to change this idea and do something else before we run out of time and money, or let's intelligently invest in scaling this up because it's looking good. Let's look at this in reverse, since you don't always come into the process right at the beginning. When we develop product, the first question we should ask is, did the implementation deliver on the stories that we created? Then we look at how the customer reacts to it. And we're trying to figure out, was what we implemented something that delivered on the value proposition that we wanted to present to the customer? And peeling back the onion further, we ask, was that problem actually relevant? Or was it we thought it was relevant, but it wasn't? And at the core of the proverbial onion, we ask, do we understand what makes this buyer tick? That's our agenda for today and how it fits into the rest of the program. You can see at the top the page for this workshop and the addresses for the curriculum material here. And I hope that you'll try this stuff out. And I hope that my contact information is at the bottom. I hope you'll get in touch with me if you do. Thanks for joining me.